Hi, I'm Vicky Carter, and you're listening to the Let's Go Kickass Today podcast. Every single month, I interview someone inspirational from the fields of music, adventure, and culture. And this month's episode is a wild one, so strap yourself in. It's the penultimate episode of Series 2, and I'm delighted to have spoken to the opera singer Seljan Nasibli.
It started in Hollywood. Looking at the women of the West does not mean that, the problems for women don't coincide with the women of the East, and they'll have a different outlook, let's say, but we all fundamentally have the same issues.
The adventurer, traveller, and barrister Faraz Shibli.
Just break everything down into tiny digestible chunks. So, rather than worrying about how far I've walked that day and what that meant for the week's progress and the month's progress, I would just start thinking about the next 100 steps or the next 50 steps.
And the founder of Speaking to agency, activist and podcaster, Yolanda Copes-Stepney.
So much, I think, of getting through life is just honestly just minding your business and keeping your eyes on your own paper. And I think that if we can learn everything and learn to accept, not tolerate, because tolerate implies some level of it getting on your nerves, and it's like, no, just accept that people can live their lives adjacent to you and it's not going to affect you.
First up, I speak to opera singer Seljan Nasibli. She tells me about overcoming her father's wishes of what career she wanted. She educates me into what really is opera music and how she created an album inspired by the Me Too movement, where she wanted to highlight that all women have the same issues, no matter where you are in the world.
Originally, your family haven't delved into the world of music, and
No.
I've heard that you were looking into jazz at first.
Yes. That was when I was 16. I thought I came here to finish school, and I was encouraged to pick up an instrument to carry on, sort of, because I was studying piano and violin back in Azerbaijan. And then I had left the violin, I remember, and I was just continuing on with piano. And then the school that I came here to, they encouraged me to carry on with my music and so on. And I thought, oh God, I'm so sick of piano and violin. I'm just going to take up singing, because I was always told I had a good singing voice. So I took it up, and I said, the teacher, I remember, he brought in Somewhere Over the Rainbow to sing. And he says, you've done a good job, but I think you'd be more suited for classical music.
At that time, your heart must have broke ever so slightly because you're a teenager. You're sick of the same instruments that your parents have forced you on. You're like, I just want to do something that I want to do.
Exactly. Because I was like, oh, okay, fine. What do you have in mind? And he whipped out sort of, I think it was Carmen opera, and I was able to sing it, and I sort of surprised myself as well.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's how it all started. My interest grew in the music, and I became so passionate about it that I decided to make a career.
It fascinates me, and with such a avid interest. So you delve into each character as if a play, and then you outpour your emotions through song. Is it, first of all, is it difficult to delve into a role? And secondly, does the language vary? So sometimes it's Spanish, sometimes Italian. Do you have to learn? Are you fluent in those languages, or do you just learn the words and then you just learn about what the emotions are behind them?
No, so I do have like a basic French. So that helps me to sort of decipher Italian more so than Spanish. I don't sing so much of Spanish repertoire, but I do sing a lot of Italian and French and Russian. Russian,
Wow.
I am, I would say, advanced in. It's better than the rest of the languages. I sort of, the way I learn a role would be I delve into the libretto, they say, which is the words of the opera and the plot, and because that's how it began. So it starts with the words, and then the composer gets inspired by um, either the topic or if it's a song, the words. So I try to find out things about the character. I do sort of character research behind if there's a history. Sometimes it's a historical plot, like it'll be about in ancient Greece or something, you know. So there'll be some like background reading towards that. So I'll do that, and then delve into the music afterwards, and I'll learn the opera from the end to the beginning.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it just makes more sense to me, because once you know how it's going to end and the reason for the character, it's easier to connect and find that reasoning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that simplifies it. I think I used to be an actress, so I completely understand about, you know, delving yourself, getting into the role and understanding that. I think just the language kind of scares me a bit. But oh my gosh, that's incredible about singing in Russian. How does it feel singing in those different languages? Because Russian always, I imagine it to be so powerful and strong, and then Italian is more just filled with romance and floral, I'd feel, you know.
Yeah, I think the approach to each language is different, and you sort of, because we have the singing technique to think about, so you have to incorporate each language into your technique.
Wow.
So that's the most difficult thing. It's not so much about knowing the language, it's more about diction and incorporating it in a way so that it becomes decipherable within the musical frame, so to speak. And you know, we're singing in big theaters, so it needs to project out. So you need to find a way to project it. Like sometimes the way that we speak the language will be completely different to singing it.
So yeah, so someone who can't be fluent in Russian can just say, well, I'll start opera then. And this is how your education at Royal College of Music came in handy. We'll be doing a master's in that. So it really embedded the kind of technicalities that you're sharing now to hone in your talent.
Yes, absolutely. And actually opera singers, they because our bodies change and our instrument is within our body. So we still keep on getting coachings and touching up with singing teachers like once a month or so, because of our bodies, because those changes through the years, they affect the voice. You know, you can go through, like women go through pregnancies, and their voice range can change as well. So you'd have to adapt.
Wow, that's the thing. Your career and your livelihood is dependent on your voice, a part of your body. So it's maintaining the health of that, making sure it's okay. I mean, do you have any tips that you make sure, you know, you always do this? Don't drink milk, or always have herbal tea.
I definitely don't eat anything like dairy or spicy foods before performing, even a day before.
Okay.
And alcohol as well. I think those affect, but in the short term, I mean, you can obviously have them. It's all right, but if you're performing, I would, you know, steer away from those, from the good things.
Definitely.
Yeah, and ice cream as well. I find it's I don't have it at all.
Wow.
Like even in the summer, yeah.
That's sorry, my face is like, oh, I'm sad. I have to have a tub of it in the freezer all the time. Emergencies.
I love it, but it's not a good idea, I think, for me. I mean, but this is also really individual.
So it can vary on each individual. Wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I listened to some of your sessions. It's incredible how you can just go so high and then stay there.
Yeah, it requires a lot of energy and stamina,
which something is you've had to build and develop over the years and practice.
Yeah, definitely. This is what like with every role, you need to make sure that you have the stamina to be able to sing it like for 3-4 hours sometimes. So yeah, that's the difficult bit. It is exhausting. It is. but it's a beautiful exhaustion.
You performed in some incredible spaces, Barbican Hall and Cadogan Hall, and a number of orchestras as well. I think the Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra,
Yes.
so many more. What's it like performing with different people? Do they have different styles? And also with the venues as well, is it dependent, as you highlighted, with the acoustics? Does it really vary depending where you are?
Yes, definitely. I think the best acoustic I felt was in the Kurt Weill recital hall at the Carnegie. It carries out the voice, and you don't have to make as much of an effort as you would in sort of other halls. And also the Opera House in Brazil as well. That carried out as well. I loved singing in those two, but you'd have to adapt the technique in a way so that it carries out within each hall. You'll have sort of sound checks and stuff to help you out in that.
And what's your future looking like now with regards to performances? Are they, easing that? Because they could easily be socially distanced in big, vast halls and spaces.
I think it's difficult to say. Like, there are some countries who are more open to it, but not here. I think maybe from May, I think it'll ease up, and maybe some outdoor performances are going to happen. Yeah.
But what's that like, performing outside, especially if it's windy? Does it get lost in the wind?
I remember I did something in France outside in the summer, and it's harder to project because the voice just goes. There's nothing to hit back,
bounce off.
And that's the most difficult bit, but it's a good experience because you get to build stamina because you work harder to navigate the voice out towards the audience.
Oh, fabulous. And you've got your first album out, Femme Fatale's Soprano Heroines from the Orient.
Yes.
Tell me about that. That's incredible.
Thank you. It was an interesting project because of the repertoire, and I remember the conductor came to me to say, I'd really like to look at this and that, and I think Yalcin Adegozalov, the conductor on the album, he encouraged me to be more open towards contemporary repertoire, which is why I explored Ravel Sherazade, and Samuel Barber, and Szymanowski. These are all very contemporary and out of the box kind of repertoire. It's not the kind of standard repertoire that you would hear sung here and there. And I loved exploring them, but I loved the idea of the woman of the Orient. So when Mr. Adegozalov, he told me to look at Ravel Sherazade, and from there we were able to explore different themes surrounding the woman of the Orient. So and we tried to incorporate all of the countries around Asia, and to explore everything thematically. Ravel Scheherazade opens Asia to us, like as a whole piece, and then the album goes to list of each country and explores each woman within that country. And I was also very much inspired by the Me Too movement that was going on. We were looking at women of the West, particularly, it started in Hollywood, but looking at the women of the West does not mean that the problems for women don't coincide with the women of the East, and they'll have sort of a different outlook, let's say, but we all fundamentally have the same issues. So yes, I wanted to explore that side of the world in terms of that, in
That's
terms of
powerful.
women's rights. Yeah,
That's amazing. Congrats. So you're talking to someone who's a massive traveler, lover of the world. And so I'd love to know, what was it like growing up in Azerbaijan and also a bit in Turkey, I think you said as well. I grew up in, well, I say a stone's throw away, but I guess it's like saying the same, England and Iceland. But I grew up a bit in Bahrain and Abu Dhabi. So there's some similarities to Turkey,
yes,
but I've never been to Azerbaijan. So I can't say if there is similarities or not.
It's a post-Soviet country, so it's not as religious, I guess, as you would get in Bahrain. Istanbul, I think, like on and off. My family lived there for like about 5 years, on and off. So we were traveling back and forth between Azerbaijan and Baku, more so, and Istanbul. It's very different to the Western world, but the same too. So in Baku and Istanbul, because it's not as religious as the Middle East, so you get that freedom, and for people who don't know, who haven't been, you can dress however you like, and there's that sort of freedom. But then culturally it's quite different. The food will be different, the history is very different. And recently in Azerbaijan we were hit by war with Armenia, so these things go on, but simultaneously it's like we've got a connection with the West. So I think it's a good crossroads between the East and the West, these two places. So I think I had a reach to both sides, and that's what I love about it.
So you've been there, you've gone back, and you've performed in front of your family. What was that like?
It was a special moment because my father was quite against me exploring a career in music. More so because he knew that it's very difficult to get into this world. And I think it was from the point of view that he didn't want me to struggle so much. Must have been like 2019, I think it was. That's what made it so special, because he was very much against it for years and years and years. And it wasn't till I was recording the album in 2017 that's when he came to visit me in Kiev, and he came to the rehearsing time in the studio, and he was amazed at what he heard and what he saw. So he completely changed his mind. And it's nice to have a support now. So that's why performing was so special. And there's something about performing for your own country, because I can't even put it into words. It was just like sort of this, like you've come home in a way, and yeah, there's that sort of feeling.
Yeah, the special connection, the sense of
yes,
the comfort, all those kind of things, exactly like you said,
yeah,
home, which is you'll never get when you perform in other places, especially when you've never been there before and it's a crowd, you don't know the language or don't know them at all.
Yes,
so
exactly. Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to pursue a career, perhaps in the music industry, even more specifically in opera, who is facing other people who are not supporting them at that moment? What advice would you give to them?
I'd say, it's very easy to say this, but do stay positive. Explore your talent in terms of go to seek advice from professionals. Get advice on your voice or your acting or whatever it is that you're exploring, and then make the decision of what you want to do, because that's what I did. I went to different professionals and I got advice, because I was, when you get that sort of pressure, you sort of start doubting yourself and there are confidence issues. So I would say yes, explore every opportunity that you have around you. So yeah, that's the advice I would give, and don't give up. whatever the difficulty, because once you go past that difficulty, it does get better.
I really enjoyed my conversation with opera singer Seljan Nasibli, telling me all things about opera, but also her life in Azerbaijan as well. I wanted you to hear just how magical her voice is. So here is a snippet of her singing Signore Escorta. And do make sure as well to check out her album Femme Fatales, Soprano Heroines from the Orient too. Next up, I speak to adventurer, traveller and barrister Faraz Shibli. He was the first Briton to cross the Gobi Desert by foot at the age of 25, and he tells me what that was like, how he overcame the physical and mental exhaustion that journey brought him, about the beautiful landscapes of Mongolia, and how his work as a barrister specialising in human rights correlates with his passion for travel.
I'd love to start at the beginning, really. I mean, what inspired you when you were 25 to decide to walk across the Gobi Desert? Because that's incredible.
Yeah, it wasn't, it wasn't anything romantic like some kind of, longing to go to Mongolia or someplace far off and distant. It was really, I think the best way to describe it is a kind of early midlife crisis. I was, like you say, in my mid-20s. I just started off a career working as a barrister in London. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, had gone away to New York for about 6 months. So I was kind of left twiddling my thumbs, not knowing what to do with myself. And I'd been working for a few years now, and I just kind of felt myself being dragged into this constant cycle of working, nights and weekends and all the rest of it. And I was working in criminal law, often in court on a Saturday as well, and just sort of, burning the candle at both ends, actually. So I felt like I needed a bit of a reset. And that's why I decided to do something that I, never did before, completely out of character for me at the time, although it's become a bit more part of my character since, and just get out there into the Gobi Desert and do something completely random.
That's so mad, because it stemmed so much of your writing now, writing guides, writing articles, and as you said, it's lit a fire in you that now you realized. And also I love how your then girlfriend is now your wife. It's like, fine, if you go to the other side of the world, I'm gonna walk across the desert.
Yeah, I mean, she actually came to join me after my Gobi trip, which was a couple of months. I went from the south of Mongolia, near the Chinese border, up to the northern border with Russia, partly by train, on the Trans-Mongolian, partly by horse and partly by van. And she met me near the Russian border, and we sort of went around on horses for a few weeks, camping and stuff. And she'd never been on a horse before, so she was pretty saddle sore afterwards, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire. But she's definitely the sort of girl who puts up with that sort of stuff and actually quite enjoys it as well.
Oh, fabulous. And what was it like? I mean, those experiences of going all the way up to China and to Russia as well, and those beautiful landscapes. Mongolia is a place that I've always wanted to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mongolia in particular, it's just this sort of boundless steppe. There are no fences, there are no borders. There are just occasionally little gers or yurts, little kind of clusters of them where families live together here and there. But apart from that, it's just this wide expanse of open, meadows and prairie and that sort of stuff on the one hand. And then you've got these huge mountains in the north and the west of the country as well. So it's just very, very much kind of epic proportions that really play with your mind and your eye in a way when you look at them. And that together with the sort of nomadic culture that's been in existence there for thousands of years is just somewhere very different, I think, from most other places I've been in the world.
Oh yeah, I'm sold. And so you also hunted with eagle hunters, because I know that they have this massive bird festival that I was hoping to go to. Hawks of prey and really incredible, beautiful animals. So what was that experience like, actually embedding yourself into the culture?
Yeah, it was really cool. It was a very I think sort of non-touristic experience in the sense that the guy who was the translator during my Gobi trip, he was actually from the northwest of Mongolia, which is where this eagle hunting community live. They're actually Kazakhs originally, and they came over from Kazakhstan to kind of avoid the Soviets. And they continued this tradition of eagle hunting in northern Mongolia when it was being sort of suppressed in Kazakhstan. So their culture has been locked in a bit of a time warp for quite a long time. So he linked me up a couple of years after the Gobi trip with his mates who are eagle hunters in the northwest, and I lived with some of them for a while, and kind of helped herd them, I say, but in practice probably just got in the way. But went along with them on lots of hunting trips where they ride up into the mountains on horses, these incredible tiny but very strong horses. Climbing steep mountains with an eagle on one arm as well, so it's pretty exhausting stuff. And then they're mainly hunting foxes, but sometimes wolves as well, to sort of protect their livestock. It was again this kind of completely alien experience, and one day you're kind of sitting at work, or for me sitting in court. The next day you're getting on a plane to Mongolia, and actually to get to this eagle hunting area, I jumped on a bus, I think, for about 60 hours, which stopped about 3 times. Just going cross country in Mongolia, which was definitely not something I'd repeat. I flew back to get back to the capital, but I mean that was in itself a bit of an experience, and not one that you can get in many places in the world nowadays.
I was going to say, most people think, oh, I'm going to go traveling. And I feel like there's different levels of travel experiences. And this 60-hour bus trip is high up there. I mean, what was it like? You'd have to hold your bladder the whole time and have those 3 stops. And were you sleeping on there as well?
No, absolutely. You're sleeping there. I mean, all there was for entertainment was, this kind of lo-fi speaker playing Mongolian tunes and someone passing around a 2-liter bottle of beer. That's pretty much it. And then you stop, you go to the loo, you have a bit of food, and you get back on. And it was, I think, torture is probably the best way to describe it. Sort of travel torture, I guess. But then, suddenly you'd be jolted to wake up in the middle of the night when someone's leg, flies and hits the back of your head because it's packed with about twice the number of occupants it should have. But you wake up, you look out the window, and there are these kind of huge icy mountains in the distance, and you realize you're going over a frozen lake. So this is in the middle of winter, and you just see things in parts of the country that are so sparsely populated that you sort of wonder, how many people have actually driven over this ground or walked across this ground before, and that in itself was just a really special experience.
Definitely. I think the worst travel journey I've had is 32 hours, and that was with 3 buses. With your one, it just sounds just never ending,
Yeah, no, very much so, yeah.
Yeah. And so those experiences doing that journey of crossing the desert, what was it like? It must have been physically and emotionally exhausting. And how did you get over those challenges in those moments? Did you ever ask yourself, like, why am I actually doing this?
Oh yeah, plenty of times, and I think I questioned myself a lot in terms of whether I was, suitably experienced to do it, and whether I'd done enough training, and just that constant doubt that comes with doing something completely out of your comfort zone. And yeah, I mean, the physical side of it was very difficult, but it was something that we kind of, after a few weeks, just got on with. Every day you'd wake up and your bones would creak more and more, and just standing up, straightening your legs was painful. But then I think the mental stuff was a lot more difficult in many ways, just because you've got such a huge space to cover. It was 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles, and we spent about 2 months walking across it. And you've got an idea in your head of how many Ks you've got to cover every day. Sometimes you fall quite far short, sometimes you go above. But on those really tough days when it's 45 degrees Celsius, Your camels, we were leading camels across the desert as well. Your camels aren't playing ball. They're trying to kick you and you're trying to load them and everything just seems to be going wrong. You just kind of think, how the hell am I going to do this for the next 30 days? So yeah, I think just the mental difficulty of just looking at such a huge task and being able to imagine completing it was probably the hardest thing for me.
Yeah, because the Gobi Desert is very different to Glasgow, I'll be honest. So how do you do that? What advice would you give to someone? Just, you've got such a physical expanse and mental expanse to conquer. What advice would you give to someone, even your former self, in that situation?
I think, when you talk about the physical expanse, just to sort of touch on that briefly, I think that definitely played havoc with the mind, in the sense that you look in some areas of the desert that are just featureless, and your sense of time almost completely disappears, and you don't know how far you've been walking, how long it's been, because you've got no sort of marker on the distance where you can think, oh, I'm getting halfway towards that. And the way that I dealt with it really best, I think, was when I started to just break everything down into tiny digestible chunks. So, rather than worrying about how far I've walked that day, and what that meant for the week's progress and the month's progress, I would just start thinking about the next 100 steps or the next 50 steps. And then when I got my head around that, I'd think, okay, well, let's make it to lunch, or let's make it to the evening camp. And then slowly, you just kind of tick off each of these chunks as you achieve, one after the other, without really thinking about the bigger picture. So you've got to try and ignore that and put it out of your mind. And then before you know it, after a few days or a couple of weeks, you look back on all those little chunks and how they built up to a huge achievement. So I think in some ways it was just kind of recalibrating your mind to think about tasks in a different way.
Definitely, that's great advice, and breaking it down. And that inspired other adventures as well. You did some long distance cycling across Thailand. What was that like?
Yeah, that was great. That was cycling down from Bangkok to a place called Surat Thani. And then we took a boat. This was with my wife, to an island called Koh Samui, and stayed there for a little while. That was our second bike adventure. The first one we did together was in Laos, where we were cycling for. Well, the aim was to cycle for about a month in a loop around the jungle. We got about halfway through. My wife came off her bike and split her leg open, so we hitchhiked to hospital. She got stitched up, and we sort of had to hitchhike the rest of the way. But that's where we got engaged, actually, by the side of her bed, as she was just recovering from being stitched up. So not the time that I meant to pop the question, but it was probably the easiest time for me to.
Also, yeah, please don't leave me. I've just dragged you through the jungle. No, I think that's wonderful. I think for me, it's so important to find someone who loves travel and adventures as much as I do. Yeah, which is so important. And so your adventures in travel has inspired you to write articles for BBC Travel and The Great Outdoors. What's it like also, because you've written a travel guide on Mongolia, and they're quite different styles of writing a travel guide and then features. What's it like, and how differing that kind of style?
Yeah, so it's the Mongolia Brat Travel Guide. I contributed to that, and yeah, I mean it's in parts very much more kind of factual, and you're trying to think about what the reader will need, and I mean it's a really difficult task because there's so many different types of readers. Some who love reading guidebooks for the history and all the color that it adds to their journey, and some who just want to know kind of where to go when, what cafe, what restaurant, that sort of thing. Fortunately, my contributions were the kind of colorful ones where I could just do a box about my Gobi trip, or I think I did a contribution to do with how to purchase and handle camels, and the random fun things.
Yeah.
So I can't promise to be. I can't say that I'm some kind of serious travel guidebook editor, and I much prefer the fun stuff.
So you mentioned your work. You're a barrister specialising in public international law, and you've worked with the UN. That's incredible. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I started off in law, practicing in London, and then around the country, mainly in criminal law, and then I sort of moved across to human rights law, mainly refugee and immigration law. And actually, bizarrely, going on that trip to the Gobi Desert, that took my legal career in a different direction as well. Because after that trip, and after the eagle hunting trip a couple of years later, I started to realize that I really wanted to work abroad. and I wanted to live a much more adventurous life. So I fired off a letter to the UN in Mongolia, to a UN agency called the International Labour Organization. And I basically said, look, I picked up a bit of the language over my expeditions there. I love the country. I know a lot about its culture and history. Do you want to give me a job? And not many people applied to the UN office in Mongolia as you know, kind of international applicants. And I was able to make my application stand out amongst those who did apply. So I got taken on initially as just an internship for a few months. And you know, I've been practicing as a barrister for almost 10 years by that point. So I was, you know, willing to kind of take that step back and kind of do an internship. But they quickly converted it into an employed role and then a consultancy. So I managed to kind of get my foot in the door that way. And then when I was living and working in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of Mongolia, I was using all the weekends to go off and do my trips and hitchhiking in the north of the country and all sorts of things that obviously I would have had no access to do day to day if I were back based in London.
Wow, that's amazing. That's the dream, to have a job that you're passionate about, you know, Monday to Friday, and then be able to do these adventurous trips. That's I mean, looking back to that moment which took the Mongolia trip, took you to a completely different direction, how do you see yourself if you didn't take that step of courage and decide to take on this challenge that pushed you in a new way?
It's a difficult one. I think, I mean, I can't imagine that I would have been going on these sorts of adventures, you know, as I've done in the last few years. Just because I mean, I was fairly outdoorsy when I was growing up. In that, you know, I joined the Scouts, I did camping and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But I was never really into expeditions at all. And, you know, I didn't really have any role models, you know, close friends or family who were, and who kind of guided me in that direction. So it was really a very random thing to do. And I can't imagine that I would be doing anything other than perhaps, you know, living in London, working as a kind of city lawyer, I think.
Yeah, so it's transformed your life completely. And do you feel that your working with human rights and refugees and migration also has parallels with your adventures as well? Because I understand that you've written a book, Kindness of Strangers, you contributed to. All donations were through Oxfam. So I feel like there has been some correlation there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that really played on my mind a bit when I was working in refugee law. This was after my Gobi expedition. You know, I would represent people generally who were appealing against decisions made by the UK government, refusing them asylum in the UK. And these were, you know, often people from places like Afghanistan or Iraq or Eritrea, often war-torn countries or you know, very, very very tough regimes. And often the way that they got to the UK in the first place was through this kind of huge task of not just organizing their travel, but, you know, literally walking for hundreds, if not thousands of miles, or, you know, swimming and kind of just all sorts of crazy stories that you would hear when you listen to people describe their journeys across to the UK. And it sort of struck me that, you know, people who do these expeditions as Westerners and, you know, kind of put it on social media and so on are just celebrated so much. And yet when you look at some of the things that these people have done, which are much more extreme and obviously completely under the radar, they're treated in a very different way. And, you know, obviously there are all the political reasons for that, but just putting that aside and looking at their kind of the sheer physical and mental things that they've been through, you know, I couldn't help but think, is there a way that we can link these two worlds together and maybe, you know, bring some good from our expedition and our writings as well?
Wow, that's so powerful and so true. You know, we go there and we just do it as an adventure. We see it as an adventure, but these are life-threatening situations that they put themselves in to hopefully have benefit themselves or their family and their family's future. Thank you for putting things into perspective. I think that really paints an honest and real picture. And you've mentioned about your wife a number of times. You've had adventures together, and I know you have a little one now. What's it like balancing both of your passion for adventure and obviously a job that is very hands-on, and a little one too?
It's not easy at all. I mean, he's been with us, well, throughout the whole pandemic, and then for about 6 months before that. So yeah, I mean, especially over the last year it's been pretty tough. But just before the pandemic hit, we were in Australia for a few months. Took some shared parental leave, which has just been, you know, incredible for us, and I'm sure for many people as well. Went around Australia in a camper van with him, drove up Western Australia, drove all around Tasmania, took him up some mountains in a harness. So it's been a really great experience as well. Probably more for us. He won't remember a thing about it. But,
yeah, you two guys want to go on an adventure, but I love that. I love how, you know, you're not stopping at all, that you have a little one. It's like, come on, we're going to harness you into the side of us and carry on.
Yeah, very much. And I think, you know, when things start to open, we plan to go to the Highlands and do a big trip around all of the Highlands in the car, and take him camping as well. So hopefully he'll get exposed to that at a much earlier age than I did, and won't have to go to the desert to sort of tweak his interest in exploration in the outdoors.
And I can't wait for you to share the stories of your adventures to him. I'll be so amazed, especially with such an upbringing like that, and he'll be enthused by it. And what are your thoughts generally on shared parental leave? Do you think there's enough leave given to men?
Yeah, I mean, it was a perfect amount of time for me. I didn't take the full amount. I think I took about 3 months-ish, which was great. And, you know, I happily would have taken more. I think probably the main thing that needs to change is now just the attitudes towards it in the workplace. You know, so I'm very lucky in that respect, but I know some people still have, you know, bosses or kind of work cultures where men taking more time off is sort of looked down upon. And, you know, even though it's perfectly possible legally, there still is a bit of a culture that says, you know, kind of, come on, you shouldn't really be doing that. You know, don't take the mick. So I think that needs to change. Probably first and foremost.
Faraz has highlighted there so many stigmas that need to be broken. You can find out more about his adventures on his website, farazshibli.com. Next up is founder of Speak and Do agency, activist and podcaster Yolanda Copes-Stepney. She tells me what inspired her to set up Speak and Do, the racism that's so inherent in the UK, specifically within the influencer and marketing area. We talk about the fantastic event where we met, Festival of Confidence, and she gives some really practical advice for someone who wants to start their business, getting organised. And we talk boundaries, something which I find incredibly difficult.
There's so many different things I want to talk about, especially the incredible work that you've done this year specifically. But first of all, let's start from the very beginning.
Yeah.
What inspired you to set up Speak and Do, the agency?
It was, my goodness, I was working at my friend's PR agency, and I worked on events, digital content, but mainly it was kind of working on the business direction side of everything, kind of structure and planning and all that fun stuff. And I knew a few young people who were influencers before that was really a term. They just had a large following online and people started showing interest. And one of them in particular had basically been forced to sign a shitty contract by some men in a car, because men can't be stopped apparently, which is messed up. And my friend's company were kind enough to use their legal team to help, just to kind of assess the contract. And they're like, yeah, don't worry, it's unreasonable, so therefore it's untenable, so that's cool, she can get out of it. And then my friend's company changed direction, and I left, and that person and a few others wanted management. So I started looking for other companies to work with them, because I was going to just work on content with Speak and Do. There were specific things I wanted to do. It was that point that I wanted to do podcasts, create YouTube shows, and that was kind of my plan for that, and then just consulting, nothing else. And I couldn't find anyone to sign them because there weren't very many agencies around, but also because racism is rife, no one was interested in the black and the brown people, so no one wanted to sign them. No one saw their value or their worth, essentially, which is funny because down the line some of those companies then used to sniff after my clients and constantly ask them if they were happy with the management. And you know, they didn't let on to my clients that actually I did go to them initially and they weren't interested in you because you were black. So it's definitely been interesting, but the main thing really was it was just protecting young women from this unregulated industry, but also protecting young women from men to a certain extent. I know there are absolutely women in modeling and music and other things that can take advantage, but we kind of know how these things work, and we know that it can be an unsafe place. So that's kind of how it started, and then it grew from there.
That's outrageous that they came back afterwards after being so disrespectful and disgusting. You know, oh my gosh. That's kind of those moments that you want to hold on and say just the right things. I hope they've learned just and grow as people. Have they learned? You're smiling as if like no, they haven't.
Well, no, because I think it's one of the things that I think has been interesting since last summer is that everyone is realizing what I've known all along, that people don't necessarily learn. It's the construct of racism and everything else isn't something that, you know, the veil's not going to be lifted that quickly, or when it lifts it doesn't mean it won't fall again. So people don't understand that. I'm not surprised by anything that happens. There is nothing that happens within that surprises me, not a single thing. So people not learning necessarily is fine. I get it, because it's a blip on their radar, and sometimes the point is that it's unconscious and it's implicit. They don't know they're doing it. So there are times when I've said to people, well, X, Y, and Z, and they're like, no, that just because it doesn't compute in their head because of the way the structure of that works. But I mean, I don't need to go into that right now, but that's just why I'm not surprised by it, really.
It's sad but true on so many levels there. What opportunities have you been able to provide for the talent and the clients that you've worked with?
Well, to be honest, the chance for them to be spotted by other agencies, because after a while there was a point where people evolved to different things, and anyone that's gone through my agency has done really, really well. I'm not saying it's me in isolation, I've done it all, but frankly, brands wouldn't know who they were at that point, at that early on in the game. People didn't know who to follow, why to follow them, etc. It was a brand new thing. And then I had to sit down and send 10,000 emails, because no GDPR then, to everyone to say, here are my clients, look at these people, start following these people, and start that dialogue. But also just even things like, well, have you considered X, Y, and Z for your career? Have you considered X, Y, and Z for your content? And how people evolve from that. I'm not saying that they would necessarily agree with me, because I think everybody has different viewpoints on it, and ego does different things. But frankly, it's like my job before was brand direction, PR, etc. So I know what I'm talking about, whether it's applied to a person, a place, or a product. And everyone has gone in the direction that I thought they would originally go, because I wrote a plan when they all joined, and I said, this is what I think you'll end up doing, or here's what I think is good for you. Some people acknowledged it, some people didn't, but they're all doing exactly what I said they would now. So
wow, that's so exciting. You had the knowledge. That's powerful. It's like you wrote it into the universe and then it happened. How has it changed since you started in the game in 2016, you'd say? How it's developed, as you highlighted, you know, influencers weren't really a thing, and now it's evolved so much that it's a full-time job and position for many people, or even people who aspire to be that as well.
Yeah, it has become a career. When I first started, no one understood what I did. No one got it. People were incredibly scathing, not to me, incredibly scathing to influencers. And I really didn't like that. I think it's a real attack on emerging sectors in the digital space. Of course, they're going to emerge. Of course, there's going to be brand new jobs. I didn't like the way that people came for them. It was an attack against Gen Z, who frankly are going to be one of the best gens. So it was just, it used to really annoy me. But now people take it seriously. And the same other generations that used to be scathing about it are now clamoring to try to make themselves relevant as influencers, because they've realized that a 19-year-old can buy a bloody house. Because and it's so much work, and when they start, they're like, oh, it's hard. And I was like, I told you it was hard. I never said it was easy. What they're doing, don't get me wrong, it's not being a nurse or a doctor. Let's not be silly. It's not being a teacher, but it is work, and it is hard, and it is specialist information. And I've kind of seen it was pretty unregulated, a bit all over the place and shaky. It's obviously now we've seen a bit more regulation with ads and all that fun stuff. We've seen it treated more respect now as well, given more budget by brands, and also contracts. Initially, only a few people did contracts. Before, they were just kind of like, well, this is what we'll hope for. I used to give contracts to brands because I was like, hun, you're going to have to pay me. So yeah. It was, we used to regulate from our side on our booking forms and terms and conditions, etc. But now everyone has one. So it's actually a lot easier.
That's good. So one of your branches as well, which is where we met, Festival of Confidence. So of course you highlight different events and resources. And so tell me what inspired you to set up Festival of Confidence, as it's, you know, a festival that inspires and empowers women. And I was delighted to first of all film at it, and then in the second year speak at it.
I mean, I'm very excited for stuff to reopen, so I can get back to that. With Festival of Confidence, it was a combination of things. So first of all, with the whole exploration of confidence and self-esteem was very much linked to having a company where I managed influencers, and I would speak to my staff who were there, like the individual kind of touch points and managers for different clients. And we just noticed that the self-esteem, self-worth and confidence of these incredibly beautiful, brilliant, bright, vivacious people, it was just all over the shop. It was all over the shop for various reasons, not necessarily down to the impact of social media on them, just life. And I always kind of looked at it, and I used to always say, like, from my office, very much detached from things, I don't get it, like, I don't understand what's happening here. And so I started talking to my clients more, and it's like, I'd like to show them why they're brilliant more so, and I'd like them to understand confidence in a different way, and I want to do things to boost it. So we used to do things like some nights out, some group activities, kind of fun challenges and stuff like that. And then I was like, I might just hold a day where I have them all together. And so while everything was happening, shortly after I started my business, my nan had a stroke, and then she passed away in November 2016.
Wow, I'm so sorry to hear that.
Oh yeah, it was mental. Well, that started off this, I don't know, the worst ever game of dominoes. Like the domino thing where it all knocks down. There were 9 people in my family passed away in the space. It was literally it was like about 20 to 21 months.
Wow.
So it was every few months something happened. And during that time, I still ran my business.
My God. I
still did lots of other things. I definitely had to do a lot of kind of head of the family thing, because my parents were just like not in the best place for it. And there was a ton of juggling going on. And my long-term relationship ended in like the most hideous way too. So I had a lot of stuff to juggle. And so threw myself into work and other bits and bobs. And then there was something where I started to realize that my female friends really had gathered around me in a really specific way. So they weren't telling me they were doing it. They were just always there. Every time I looked up, I was like, what are you doing here? Like, people just in my house who I hadn't invited round, my friends staying a lot, making a lot of excuses to come round and things. And they were like, even my clients as well. Like, I used to have a client, Jordan, and she used to always ring me. And I got to the point where it used to annoy the shit out of me. And I was like, what do you want? And she was like, I'm ringing you because I know something's wrong with you. And she was ringing me because she knew that I was being affected by all this, and I was just functioning. So and she was the first, her and Amma in particular, Amma used to message me all the time. There were particular things they were doing, and they're like, because we know something's wrong with you. We know that you're working, and that's great, but we know that all this other stuff's happened to you, and we know that that's not cool. And then I realized everyone was doing it, and I was like, all these amazing women are just literally kind of, I don't know, kicking into woman mode of just, well, yeah, some stuff's going down, so we'll pick up our friend, we're still going to keep moving, we'll just pick her up and drag her along. It's cool. And that inspired me more so to bring the Festival of Confidence forward, because I was like, when I hadn't necessarily lost confidence in myself, it was in different areas and different things, and in life, I suppose it was a lot of hope and other things were gone, and they brought it all back. And so when I brought the initial event together, a lot of the people speaking and people involved were the people that did that for me. And I think there's so much, I mean, one of the tropes I dislike immensely is this suggestion that women need to be reminded to support each other. I find it massively offensive. Like, don't just, make sure you fix someone else's crown. I genuinely cannot tell you how much I hate that, because we don't need to be told. Women do it by default. What the hell do you think a coven is? Like, we've been doing it for time. So we do it naturally. We don't need to be reminded. That's some patriarchal nonsense. And that is proof of that. That was women activating to support a woman who needed it. And I didn't ask, and I hadn't said anything. They just knew. And that is what that event is about. It's boosting women's confidence, it's celebrating women's confidence, and it's celebrating that togetherness that we just do. If you can go, women, we can go into a toilet and make friends with someone, and it's like, this person is now my best friend. And that's a special gift that women have, and that's what the Festival of Confidence is. It's a giant toilet where we're all making friends.
What a great metaphor. I did actually make a few friends whilst I was there.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so open and honest with me about, your situation there. I can't believe that. That's awful. The amount of tragedy one after the other, and you still picked yourself up and you still worked. Like, that is just incredible. And I'm so glad that your friends and even how wonderful your clients were to be able to look after you and keep an eye on you. I love that. I love that it's a conversation that hasn't even been spoken, and it's like checking up on each other, and it's that maternal instinct that we have, that's caring for one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've loved as well about the women that have been involved in the Festival of Confidence, like you and Zoe and all these other people, is that I feel like everybody turned up, they got something out of it, but then also it was just so nice to make all these brand new connections with women who were in different times in their lives and going through different things. And I think we all carry something, don't we? And don't get me wrong, what got me through a lot of that as well was therapy. Everyone go to therapy. Please go to therapy.
The world would be a nicer place if everyone went to therapy.
Genuinely. So I went to grief therapy. I've got an amazing therapist called Jill, who's from North Carolina. She is the best woman ever. And that's what got me through a lot of that support of my friends, and recognizing that I needed to get professional help to get me through, because that much grief is not normal. So it's kind of, it helped. And now I can talk about it, and it's like I can talk about the way grief changed me, and I can talk about it openly in a really specific way. And and I think don't get me wrong, it was interesting as hell. It was an odd time, but I definitely am better for it. So that's the main thing.
You're incredibly strong as well to not only recognize you need help, but also, speak about it. And that's the thing with the wonderful work that you did and involved so many other people. You, like the positive dominoes effect, you impacted so many women who went there, impacted their lives, affected their friends and their circles, which is wonderful. And so the third one's in the pipeline at the moment. Are you waiting for it till everything opens up?
Yes, I am. Yeah. So I was thinking about doing stuff online at the, when everything started, but then I was like, actually, I can wait until we emerge. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, I had so many Festival of Confidence events planned, including out in the US. So obviously I had to cancel everything. So that was a lot of cancellation, but I wasn't disheartened by it at all, because I was like, it's all right, we'll do it when we come out of everything. But then right at the beginning, I started to write a new program. So I plan the program and the content really carefully. So I kind of say, here's what I want, this as well from taking part. Here's kind of what I want from the content. Here's an idea of what I think people need. And then I see what everybody wants to do, what content they want to cover, and then match people to those things and plan it in a very specific way. So at the beginning of the very OG lockdown, I'm gonna like to call it, I actually started planning what the next Festival of Confidence will be, and it's actually going to be, the theme is going to be recovery. And so I've already started planning around bringing back the speakers from the first two events and how we take those different themes, so financial, careers, personal confidence, body confidence, fun things as well, like obviously Cherry's got to be there teaching us how to shake our tassels.
Yes.
There's going to be flower walls and flower yoga and all those things that we had before. But the theme really is going to be about how we go forward taking the things that the good things about lockdown, which was that taking that step back and being more self-aware, more self-reflection, more introspection and balance of time. And then also how we recover, because the world is going to move at a particular pace and we might not be ready for it yet. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And then just working on picking a date, really.
Wow, that sounds incredible. That's going to sync with so many people, the stages of recovery. What's the last year been like for you? Because you've also been creating useful resources, Q&As, panels, talks on mental health and how to be anti-racist, which is both of them very well needed throughout this year. I mean, what was that like, putting that together, and the response from that as well?
That's been awesome. I mean, the last year, a lot of times I haven't been truthful, sorry, about how I felt about last year. And I feel like I can be now. Do you know what? It's been all right. And I know it's been hideous for other people. I am so privileged. I cannot stress enough how privileged I am to be able to have a business that can get through it, to be able to have a skill set that meant I was hireable, all sorts of different things. I'm just incredibly lucky. And to be able to be financially sound enough to get through it and stuff. So it hasn't been that bad. But then also what puts that into perspective is when you've had 2 years of everyone dying, trust me, it don't matter what happens no more. That's why. And I was like, why has it been easy? I'm like, it's easy because I'm privileged. It's easy because truly, when you've been through that much stuff, it makes so many other parts of life easier. It's like this. I once stayed in my house for 40 days voluntarily. So it's like being forced to stay in for a pandemic. I'm all right. So I think that's kind of helped me get through it. But then working on Speak On has been great. I did have a plan to launch Speak On in 2020 as well. So the initial event was going to be an event focused on men's mental health. We had like brands lined up and some really, really cool things planned, just do it in London somewhere, something small, intimate, with some of the guys that were featured actually that have taken part in Speak On. And so when the pandemic happened, I was like, well, I spoke to Abby, who's my producer, and I was like, well, we'll bring it forward. We'll bring the podcast forward because we were going to do that later in the year. And then we'll just focus on that. And then the online events really just kind of happened from there, because the main point of Speak On is bridging the gap where we don't have information. I think we live in a really bipartisan world, and I know this because even I join in with this sometimes. There are people that I'm like, I don't like your views, so I cannot be your friend, because there are things that we're going to fundamentally disagree on. So we create our own echo chambers, etc. But there are so many beliefs that people hold and really dig down on because they just don't have the information about the other side, and they just don't know everything. And if they knew everything, then maybe they just calm down a bit, because so much, I think, of getting through life is just honestly just minding your business and keeping your eyes on your own paper. And I think that if we can learn everything and learn to accept, not tolerate, because tolerate implies some level of it getting on your nerves. And it's like, no, just accept that people can live their lives adjacent to you and it's not going to affect you. And that's kind of what Speak On is. It's bridging this gap with knowledge and information and understanding. And then, I mean, when everything happened in June, it just made sense that anti-racism was the first thing we started with. Mental health was always on the agenda, but it just kind of got pushed back because of that.
Definitely. And I think there's so many people, and myself included, you know, who want to be educated in areas that they might not have an education. So it was so useful to provide such a resource that could connect with so many people. And you mentioned your podcast as well. How's that going?
Ah, God, I love it. One of the things that's truly kept me sane as well, because then I get to speak to so many different people. But I've really enjoyed it. I've learned so much. Again, the point of it is learning. I'm learning loads, and we have different themes. So last year was just kind of topical things. We just arbitrarily chose topical things. People we wanted to speak to. Me and Abby would just go through and pick people like, this person's interesting. And then when I planned the structure of this year going forward, we have a different theme every 3 months. So at the moment we're talking about love, sex and relationships. So we talked about polyamory and threesomes and how to make relationships last, and talked to my friend Rich about living with HIV. We're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, like recovering from relationships where people may have been with narcissists. Talked about everything. We've talked about sex education, and we have some really cool subjects coming up. And then going forward, we're going to be digging down into gender, sexuality. My theme that I'm really pumped about is things we should be talking about, because we're going to be picking some really big subjects and bringing together different people to talk about them. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I love that. 3 months is a solid amount of time to really explore a theme in detail and have loads of different voices that they can add different contributions to it. That's wonderful. So, what advice would you give to someone who can set up their own business, set up their own consultancy, a podcast, events, and there's so many angles and aspects to your own work. What advice would you give to someone who's starting up to translate their passion and their interest to any of those arms?
That's a good question. I think that one of the main things, and I'm sorry if anyone's listened to this that may have heard me say it before, is that if you've got an idea, just kind of crack on with it. I think don't worry too much about what other people say, because I think there is an element of us, there's risk assessment whenever we're doing anything, and there's in that risk assessment will come questions where we're going to ask different people their opinions on things. Their opinions don't always matter. You just have to do what feels right for you, and in the time that you sit down and deliberate, someone else is going to do it. So if you have an idea, just crack on. And also, done is better than perfect. I think we can procrastinate, and we can, subconsciously, in our effort to get things perfect. Essentially, it's procrastination. Nothing's going to be perfect. You don't know what's going to happen. Just do it, and then along the way, just work at it, and then you'll get it to that place you want to get it to. Because I could have done that with any of the things that I've done, and I wouldn't have started them yet if I was waiting for them to be perfect. But when they were done, the achievement you get out of those micro goals and about kind of just completing those things, that's enough to be beyond perfect. It doesn't need to be.
What practical day-to-day advice would you give to someone to, keep a good work-life balance, but also keep on top of so many projects? You were mentioning before to me about alarms. You have a number of alarms.
Yes, I love an alarm, and I have a whiteboard, and I have notebooks. They are the main practical things that keep my life organized. Look, I'm not saying that my life doesn't ever become unorganized, because sometimes it is hella hectic and I am all over the place. So I kind of tend to go in a cycle of 3 months of organization, 1 month of chaos, and you just have to be okay with that. But the main thing is I have alarms for things. So I have particular, like, wake up at particular times in the week. I have particular alarms set for the weekend, so I don't turn into some weird nocturnal animal. And I have different notebooks for things. So I have a notebook for ideas, I have a notebook for like day to day, and I have a notebook for long-term business goals and things, and that structure. So I know what the overall goals are for 3 and 6 months. Nothing beyond that, because you don't know what's going to happen. There's no point in beating yourself up.
Exactly. Yeah.
No point. And also a whiteboard. I have a whiteboard, and on that whiteboard, the things I'm doing in that week or 2-week period. And then I've prioritized it. Prioritize what goes in the whiteboard. Whatever order that goes in is whatever order it goes in. That just has to be what it is, unless something has a deadline. But then I just go through and I just kind of wipe stuff off it or put a line through it. And anything that's not on that whiteboard, unless it's an emergency that someone's bringing to me, it's just not getting done. And that's all there is to it. Also, I don't work beyond a certain point. If people want to have meetings with me, I'm like, I'm not available. And they're like, "Are you busy?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm busy not having a meeting. I'm not a doctor. I'm not on call. Nothing is an emergency that you have to speak to me outside of working hours."
Yeah.
It's like, unless you're working on a campaign that goes live, truly leave me alone. And then I record content at night though, because that's fun. But then apart from that, that's kind of it. Boundaries and alarms to tell me to stop working, and one to tell me to wind down before bed. So 9:30, it goes off, and it's like, whatever you're doing, just stop it, hun. It's basically, it's kind of the vibe, and a motivational tone, because you don't want it to be jarring. So yeah.
I feel like I've learned so much from you, but I'm the worst at boundaries. For years, I've just let people take, and I've given, and friends, relationships, colleagues, and I've only just really learned in the last year what boundaries are. And it's a game changer. It really is. It's more important to say no and care for yourself rather than allow people to take advantage of you by saying yes all the time.
Absolutely. It's about setting the boundaries with the relationship with yourself. And what are they? What are the boundaries with your relationship with yourself? It's like, how much sleep do you need to sacrifice for others? And it's not, I think so many people think that self-care and all those things can be selfish. And yeah, it is. That's fine. be selfish.
Yolanda Copes-Stepney there, inspiring me to set more boundaries in life. Yes, truly kick-ass woman there. Make sure to follow Speak and Do on socials for the latest Speak On events and, of course, the next Festival of Confidence event. That's it from me for this month, and I'll see you next month for the last episode of Season 2's Let's Go Kick-Ass today. Please do comment, rate, subscribe and share. I'm Vicky Carter, and you keep kicking ass.